Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is Lori Smith. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another Restoration, and I'm glad to be here. And I hope you're having a good morning. I'm just waking up at 6:30 here in the morning, Tuesday morning, August the 30th, and just waking up, having coffee, and just glad to be here. Getting a little bit better, getting over my cold, sort of working on that. And so far the week is rolling along quite well, and I hope you're all having a good week too. We'll get right into this. This is just a look like a morning reflection really for me, for my healing journey, so I can make sure that I do the work, sort of holds me accountable, and so that I'll actually continue on and looking at things and, looking for what's helpful for me and I'm just passing it on to you just to, if it's, just in case it's helpful for you too. So hopefully you're getting something out of these shows. And I know that I do. So if we don't want to make sure you're safe enough really to listen this morning, do a safety checklist. Make sure you're safe enough to be listening, and you know where you're at in your healing journey, and you're far enough along that you can actually listen to something like this without being triggered. And if you're not sure how to do that, you can get really good information from ASCA, Adult Survivors of Child Abuse, a Morris Center program. And that's the Survivor to Thriver manual, and I looked at that. I actually read it a long time ago, and the first chapter is devoted to safety first. It's like almost 60 pages long. So make sure you get that information to keep yourself safe, if you're a survivor of abuse, so that you don't trigger and then, end up kind of going backward in your healing journey. And, these things can be difficult, and we know it is. And so you want to make sure you're safe enough to be listening and that you're not going to hurt yourself or somebody else. So, you want to be very careful what you're listening to and what you're doing. And if you're not sure, like I said, get some help. There's lots of information out there for people, for safety and for triggering and stuff like that for survivors of abuse. So make sure you get that information and learn how to keep yourself safe, right? So we'll get right into this. We're looking at Victim to Survivor to Thriver from HAVOCA. That's help for adult victims of child abuse, HAVOCA.org, and HAVOCA. They have a cool thing. It's neat. It's like a little thing to gauge where we're at, sort of thing, from victim to survivor to thriver, and I think it's really interesting. So we'll look at the next one. Yesterday's was lives in the past, the victim. The survivor is aware of patterns, and the thriver lives in the now. And then this morning we're looking at the victim is suspicious of therapists, and the survivor sees therapists as a guide during projections. And then the thriver sees reality as their projection and owns it. So that's kind of interesting. I know just for me, I was very, and actually still am, suspicious of therapists just because, I don't know, I just feel like I don't trust very many people. And, it's just, I couldn't trust anybody growing up really in my family, so I just don't trust people. A trust issue, but I want people to be able to trust me, so I always have to put myself out there to try to trust other people. I have actually met some therapists and talked to some therapists who I really do trust, and I thought were really trustworthy, and I would trust with my information. So, I used to be very suspicious of therapists, and now today I guess I'm more toward the survivor on that. Sees therapist as a guide, right, and instead of a threat, right? So, I've come a long way, and so I'm not really there yet. I would say I'm about halfway probably between survivor and thriver on that. Sees reality. The thriver sees reality as their projection and owns it. Well, I see reality definitely because I'm not at all where I was when I started my healing journey. I was in reality. I've never been in denial about the abuse. I did stuff the child sexual abuse way down so that I didn't have to deal with it because I was being abused physically and in every other way by my mother, really, emotionally, verbally, psychologically, and physically by my mother and my dad. So I couldn't deal with the child sexual abuse because I was always trying to stay sane in the home. And so that the CSA got stuffed way down, but I knew it was there, and there was several issues that came up through my life that, I had to face it again because of certain things that happened, gynecologist checkup, and my brother, who had actually sexually abused me, had talked to me on the phone when he was committing suicide one time and brought all of that back, and I was a young teen at the time, and so I had to deal with it certain times in my life, but I would just stuff it again. I would just stuff it way down there so I didn't have to deal with it. So that's about the only thing that I did. I didn't really go into denial or anything like that, or I just kind of stuffed it just so I could survive. But I've always looked at things, realistically. It was my reality, being abused, and um, you know, so I'm kind of really, in between, I guess, the survivor and the thriver, heading more towards the thriver on that one. But they are interesting to look at these things to see where, sort of gauge where we're at really in the process from moving from victim to survivor to thriver, right? So it's very cool. So you can get that from Havoka.org. And we're going to look at this morning inner child healing from Havoka as well. We're just going to look at the rest of this article here that they've got. This is just the beginning page at how to begin, right? So we're just looking at that. And they said, it's vital to start learning how to not give power to that critical shaming voice, that critical parent. That's what they were talking about. We were looking at yesterday. They're talking about in this article. There's that critical inner parent or critical inner critic that beats us up with shame, judgment, and fear. So this critical parent voice developed to try to control our emotions and our behaviors. A lot of people have it, and some people have it, and they call it their inner abuser. Right? I've always called it kind of my inner critical parent. It's just the one that, like they said here, continues to beat us up, right, with shame, judgment, and fear. And that's that inner voice. Really, it's my abuser's voice. For me, that's what it is, and telling me all these things that I knew were not true, but just over the years and being made to feel lesser than and not worth anything, worthless, and whatnot. Even into my adult years, that voice was really part of me, and I've had to learn how to ignore it. So it's really I don't hear it much anymore, which is great, because when I first started my healing journey, it was still there, going full force. And now, so many years later, I don't even really hardly hear it anymore. Once in a while, and I just shut it down. So I made a lot of progress in this area. They were saying that so we need to start observing ourselves from at least a more neutral perspective, because they were saying we need to take a third-party look. So we have to be more neutral. They're saying become a scientific observer, a detective, like the Sherlock Holmes of your inner process, as it were. They said we need to start being that detective, observing ourselves and asking ourselves where that reaction, thought, feeling is coming from. Why am I feeling this way? What does this remind me of from my past? How old do I feel right now? How old did I act when that happened? And one of the amazing things about this process is that as one starts to become more aware of our own reactions, we also start to become more aware of others. We start seeing when the people in our lives are reacting like a little kid or adolescent or teenager or whatever. And what they're saying here is very true. Once I started doing this inner child healing work and started working on what my behaviors were, and it really all started with my healing journey. I had never done that before. I just was playing the victim. I was always the victim, right? Well, I was a victim, a victim of horrific abuse, and that's where I was, a victim mentality, victim mode. But when I started my healing journey, I started to look at why I was doing what I was doing, because a life coach actually had talked to me. And it's kind of like a work coach, really. She was a working coach, but she was probably a life coach, because she knew she knew how to talk to me. And this situation came up at work, and I had this work coach, I guess, life coach lady, talk to me and was mentioning a few things, that I was doing, and I was like, wow, well, she doesn't know my past. She doesn't know I've been abused, And I thought, well, what she's talking about here is really interesting. And I said, I'm just coming from a background of really horrific abuse, right? And so this is my reaction to it, And she was like, well, you can keep running if you want. You can keep running, or you can face things. She was really a helpful person to talk to, and that was some of the start of my own interest in actually looking at my behaviors and saying, wow, what am I doing that is so self-sabotaging, and what am I doing? Because I didn't realize before that I was doing that. I didn't realize that that's what I was doing, was self-sabotaging or reacting from these old wounded points in my life, right? So this is what they're talking about. We need to ask ourselves, when something comes up, we need to observe ourselves and ask ourselves where that reaction, thought, feeling is coming from. Why am I feeling this way? What does this remind me of from my past? And how old do I feel right now? How old did I react when that happened, right? Because many times we're reacting, it's our inner children that are reacting. It's these wounded parts of ourselves that are reacting. And this inner child could be 12 years old. 10 years old, and I'm the adult in the situation. And so it's kind of like I have to always judge myself on what I'm doing and gauge what, like especially if I have something coming up that just, I know I'm going to have to deal with it, but it's bothering me. I don't like confrontation. It could be anything. It could be a work thing, or dealing with people, relationships, and whatnot. I have to seriously think about, where am I at in that? Am I just reacting from my woundedness from being abused as a child, or is this something that's my adult self needing to have done and needing to speak out about? So it is important to get in touch with that stuff, and I know I've done a lot of work in it, actually, because I studied John Bradshaw's work, and John Bradshaw does a whole lot of work on toxic stuff, like toxic shame. And when I started reading into John Bradshaw's work and looking at his books and stuff, and the inner child healing, you actually can pinpoint toxic behavior in yourself, but because you can do that, like they're saying here, you start to become aware of what other people are doing too. So you can actually see that, other people are reacting from their little kid, their adolescent, their teenager, or whatever. So we become more aware of how others are behaving. That's the real problem with this stuff, is because once you start looking at your own stuff and you start learning what these things are, toxic behaviors, toxic people around us, there are toxic people around us, and we recognize some stuff. Because I study codependency, I can actually pick out codependency now with other people. And I don't allow codependency in my life anymore. I don't allow it around me. I just don't deal with codependency. I'm not going to allow anybody to get a hold of me that way ever again. So it's like I understand what codependency is, and I studied it for quite a few years. So I recognize codependency in people, and so yeah, it's kind of helpful because it helps us to not be re-victimized, right? And also, things like narcissism. What's narcissism? I studied narcissism, right, very carefully, because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to repeat and continue on all these horrible behavioral stuff that my parents had given to me as a gift. My abusive parents, who were codependent and narcissistic and sadistic. Narcissists are quite often sadists. They like to see you in pain, and they like to see you miserable. They will never own up to their own half of the deal. They'll never own up to the fact that they may have hurt you. It's always you've done something to them, right? But they will never own up to the fact that they probably did something to you too to make you feel bad, but they're never going to own up to that. And they love to see you hurt and cringe and cry. And that's a terrible thing. That's what a lot of people are like, actually, and it doesn't have to be our abusers. It could be just people in the world. It's really helpful. I know it helped me out a lot to learn what these things are so I can recognize it in other people, because just because I'm on my healing journey does not mean that other people are, right? And so, like I said, with my own family, I had to cut my own family off because they are so toxic. We could only be together in a room for about 15 minutes before all the garbage would start again. And I was just like, look, if we can't be in the same room together for more than 15 minutes, we don't need to hang out. We're just going to hurt each other. There's no point, So I have to always question my behaviors, and not very many people will do that. I know that I do, and very few people will actually take a look at their own behaviors. They're just looking at everybody else's, but they won't be responsible for their own. And I know for myself, because I wanted to heal, and actually move forward in my healing journey and actually become a better person to myself and to others around me. First to myself and then to others. That it's kind of, not everybody else is working on their behaviors. So I see a lot of bad behavior out there. And then I have to be careful that I'm not doing the same thing, right? And so it's just quite interesting. They say here, the more we become aware of their reactions, the easier it becomes to stop taking their behavior personally. So this is when we actually realize there are people that around us who are possibly reacting like little kids, they're saying, or adolescents or teenagers or whatever. And they said the more we become aware of their reactions, the easier it becomes to stop taking their behavior personally, which then makes it easier to detach from our own reactions and observe ourselves. So it's quite interesting. So it says it's an amazing, miraculous process that can help us to change our relationship with ourselves, with other people, with life. Becoming more aware, becoming conscious of a new way of looking at ourselves and life is the beginning of a process of learning to forgive and love ourselves, right? So learning to forgive and love ourselves, that's very important. A detective always looks at cause and effect. By becoming a detective, solving the mystery of why we have lived our lives as we have, we can start to free ourselves from our past, they're saying here. And by doing the inner child healing, we can start to learn how to really be alive instead of just surviving and enduring. And that's awesome. That's true. I know when I started looking at this stuff, and I didn't realize well, I didn't think it was inner child healing work. I was looking in and looking at the abuse from a third party point of view so that I could see the total picture of what happened instead of just my woundedness. And because I grew up in a big family and I knew, this destruction like a tornado came through and, over the course of many, many, many years destroyed our lives. It was like a continual tornado. And so it's just like that's why I have severe PTSD, I'm sure of it. It was just continual abuse that just went on year after year after year after year. So I wasn't the only one in the family. And I thought, I'm gonna look at this as a third party person instead of just looking at it from my eyes as a victim of this mess, and look at this as third party and say, why am I behaving the way that I do? What choices did I make in life, and why did I make these choices? And then go back and look at the abuse, and say, well, I made that choice because of, and I had to really study it out. So I've done a lot of work over on this for many, many years now. Like I said, mainly the bulk of it from 2009. But I did start in 2007. I just didn't do a whole lot with it till 2009. But still, even 2009 to 2016, that's a long time. So we'll pick up with the rest of this tomorrow. We'll take a look at it. Positive reinforcement. What are we doing right in our daily walk? What am I doing right here that's helping me out? Looking at positives instead of negatives. And like I said, I caught a bad cold. My husband really got kind of sickly. He started going downhill. He's terminally ill. Fell down last week and scratched his arm up and bruised himself up, and I'm worried about him having to go back in the hospital. So my main focus right now is trying to get myself better and trying to help him and make sure that he's all right, because we're trying to avoid hospitalization. He was in the hospital last year for 5.5 months. So steady. They never let him out for 5.5 months. It was terrible. They were almost not going to let him out. And so we try to keep him out of the hospital and keep him well and as best as possible. He's terminally ill, so not doing well at all. But he's still here, and we still enjoy our day. I have a life outside of all this. I work full time, but my life is not all about my work, and it's not all about my healing journey. I have a life outside of all of this, and so a life with my husband, and we don't have any children because I'm barren because of child sexual abuse. But so this is our life. It's very quiet. There's not a lot of people around, but we enjoy each other's company, and I do the best I can to help him out, and he does the best he can to make it as easy on me as possible, because he knows that I'm really the only one that can do this stuff, right? So I'm doing the best that I can, and that's about all I can do. I'm not too hard on myself. I really try to be careful with that so that I don't become too hard on myself. There's only so much I can do, and there's only so many hours in the day. So I do take time for myself. I take time for my mental health as well, because I'm emotional, stuff like that, because I have to make sure that I'm strong enough, not only physically but emotionally, to handle all this stuff. And so I do take time out during the day to do that for myself. So that's why by the time I work an 8-hour day to help him cook and clean, run errands, because he can't do anything for himself really, and all that stuff, I'm kind of, at least very little time. And then I do spend time, like I said, for myself. So I spend some time during the day actually working, just reading books that I like to read, taking time for myself, or thinking things through, thinking about things, and or just watching some sort of something. I don't watch a whole lot of TV, but there's an odd thing I like watching every now and then. But I do take time for myself, and I think that's good. Other than that, really, I'm still trying to work on getting a little bit more organized. That's what I'm trying to do. And what am I doing in my daily walk? At least I'm still trying to make progress in my healing journey, and I think that's the important thing, instead of just dropping it like I did for a couple of years there. And I'm happy to be back on it to keep going forward, and so that's important, right? We'll look at a positive affirmation. It says, I can trust all of my thoughts and emotions. Yesterday's was, I'm a responsible person. Now today's is, I can trust all of my thoughts and emotions. And well, if we can, we can. If we have to be honest with ourselves. I can trust all of my thoughts and emotions. Well, I have to trust that I'm doing the best that I can. And I have to be careful, and think things through, And what are my emotions? Well, I have the right to feel the way that I do. And like we all do, right? But then I have to sit back and say, well, how much of that is coming from my woundedness? How much of that's coming from anger from my woundedness? How much of that's coming from sorrow from my woundedness, So I have to, I'm always looking at what I'm thinking and feeling and what I'm dealing with, to make sure that it's not something that I'm dealing with from the past, or whether it's something I'm dealing with from today as an adult, in my adult world that really has nothing to do with the abuse, right? So it's interesting, but that's something I could say. I trust all of my thoughts and emotions, and actually, I think what's more important is that I validate all of my thoughts and emotions. I'm allowed to feel and I'm allowed to think, and I have the right to think and I have the right to feel what I want to feel. As a child, I wasn't allowed to think or feel what I wanted to think or feel or say anything about the way that I felt about the abuse, or that I was not being treated right by anybody in my family, and I wasn't getting anything that I really needed. I mean, I was fed, and they didn't keep me locked in a basement somewhere with the other siblings, chained up and stuff. But we got to eat and stuff. But like, the abuse was horrific, and it was a day-to-day thing. We weren't allowed to say anything about it, right? So I wasn't allowed to. I had my own thoughts, and they weren't very healthy, and I had my own emotions, but so it became rage, an internal rage, which I never really let out until I got older and it started to sort of just rear its ugly head. And this is a real problem. So emotions, and I can trust all my thoughts and emotions. I'm actually getting in touch with them, and I did a lot of study on anger and rage and the shame, shame rage connection and all that stuff was very, very helpful for me to look at. That's for sure. And so today I can really trust all of my thoughts and emotions because I know where they're coming from. While I was on the beginning part of my healing journey, I really couldn't say that, but now today I can. And so I've made a lot of progress. Self-care, what are we doing for ourselves, physically, spiritually, emotionally, to care for ourselves? What am I doing? I'm still working on trying to get over this cold, and I didn't sleep well at all again last night because it's so stuffed up. And no good sleep for 2 nights, actually 3 nights in a row now. So I'm getting a little bit tired and I have big bags under my eyeballs. And I'm working full time all week, I don't get a break until Sunday. So I'm really, I'm just taking it easy. I'm not too hard on myself, and I haven't done too much to work on my stuff. But I am working, like I said, slowly through things, so that's important. And we can look at this HAVOCA Survivors Bill of Rights thing. This is really cool. It says you have as a matter of personal authority. They had that section there, and then for the preservation of personal boundaries, we looked at that one. And in the sphere of personal communication, you have the right to, and this is today's, to ask for changes when your needs are not being met. So we have the right, in the sphere of personal communication, we have the right to ask for changes when your needs are not being met. And, this is something that survivors of abuse, have a hard time with because, we're not allowed to meet our needs, right? As children, no. And many times teens, I wasn't allowed to meet my needs at any time when I was growing up until about the age of 17, 18. Because then I could have left and moved out. And my abuser, codependent, narcissistic, sadistic mother actually started playing me, trying to make, she wasn't trying to make things right. She was dangling carrots in front of me. You can have this relationship. We can have a relationship with me if you stay and help me. Because she didn't want to be left alone with my abuser dad. Because I could have moved out. I could have ran away. Right? They wouldn't have called it in. I just disappear. No big deal. So my needs were not being met. Ever. And so as an adult, I have a real hard time with that. If I think I almost get volatile and vicious when I think that my needs are not being met and I have to force the issue. And that's a problem, right? But then I think about it and I think, no, because, I'm not the only one in the relationship. And if I've said that, if I've asked for the changes and the changes have not happened and I did spell the needs out, and I did make sure that people understood that I really wanted this, whatever it was, because it's a need that I had, and they're not being met, then I have every right to get upset about it. You know what I mean? My needs are very important to me. They are just like your needs are important to you. My needs are important to me. And so there has to be a meeting ground, right? So it's like we have the right to ask for changes when our needs are not being met. Yes, we do. And that's the problem with abuse survivors is that we don't even know how to begin to ask for those needs because then all of a sudden, I don't deserve anything anyway, and maybe what if that person ends up not liking the fact that I asked for some changes that I really needed, and then all of a sudden I'm out or I'm blacklisted or blackballed. Well, that does happen. It's happened to me several times in my adult life at work situations and things like that, trying to get needs met. But then I had to realize that I have respect for myself. I care about myself enough that, too bad, right? It's kind of like if I don't want to work someplace or I don't want to be in a relationship, whether it's working relationship, personal relationship, doesn't matter. If I can't voice my needs and the changes are, if I can't ask for changes when my needs aren't being met, then that's not a good, healthy relationship anyway. So I just don't need to be in it at all anyway. Whether it's a working relationship, like I said, or a personal relationship, or a family relationship, doesn't matter. If somebody's not going to respect my needs, they want me to respect their needs. But then when it comes to mine, they just walk all over it, and it's no big deal. That's what happened to me as a child. My needs were not being met. I mean, literally, I was bleeding, from child rape. I had all kinds of horrific beatings. I was not getting my needs met at all. I mean, my mom wasn't even going to help me stay alive. That was up to me. And so it's kind of like, well, that's just great, my needs were not being met, never, ever, emotionally, psychologically, physically, and so now as an adult, I have every right to make sure that when I ask for changes and I let people know, that these are some changes that I'd like, that I really could use because my needs aren't being met, then I have every right to stand up and speak out about that when it's not happening. We do have rights, and you have a right to have a good life just like everybody else and be treated with respect and dignity. And if your needs aren't being met and people are just brushing it off and passive-aggressive garbage, then you have a right to stand up and say something. And it quite often does cause problems. But you know what? I care about myself more than I care about trying to feed a codependent person or a narcissistic, kind of sadistic person who just only really cares about themselves and doesn't mind seeing you grovel. Right? I'm seeing me grovel. You know what I mean? I'm done with that because I groveled at my mother's feet for years, right? And so I'm not doing it anymore. Right? I'm not groveling at a codependent, narcissistic, kind of a mentally ill person's feet anymore. And so when I ask for changes and they're not met, I have every right to stand up. And that doesn't mean I need to be abusive, I just need to realize that sometimes you got to move on, and I did, and I've done that several times in the past. And am I glad that I did that? Absolutely, because it's not fair to me as an adult to not get my needs met and just to try to meet everybody else's needs, but then mine don't count still as an adult. That's ridiculous, and I made my mind up a long time ago about that. That's just allowing myself to be re-victimized, right? So make sure your needs are getting met. You have to be your number one best advocate to make sure that your needs are getting met, right? Personal Bill of Rights, number 21. This is from Charles H. Whitfield, Healing the Child Within. This is cool. You can catch this just about anywhere. Just type in Charles H. Whitfield, MD, Healing the Child Within. This stuff is all over the place. Number 21, I have a right to change my mind at any time. As a survivor of abuse, that's right. I, just like everybody else, other people, even though they haven't been abused, have the right to change their mind at any time. So survivors of abuse have the right to change their mind at any time, and I have the right to change my mind at any time. That's just the way it goes. I know a lot of people don't like that, but that's too bad, right? And we do have rights. And Evoca getting started, let's see, we'll look at that tomorrow. We're running out of time here. We'll look at the Inner Child Quilt Square from Meditation Gallery. This is Irving Studios Child Abuse Survivor Monument. And Irving Studios. This is their quilt square for healing the inner child. It's meditations. You can kind of go to their website and check these meditations out. Really cool. It says, help your inner child feel worthwhile and loved. It says, help your inner child make sense of the hurt. Let your inner child know that the abuse was not their fault. And let your inner child know that any shame and self-blame can be let go of, right? And allow your inner child to rest in the arms of a trusting, caring, nurturing person. So this is part of the inner child work that I've had to do, and I'm still working on it. Allow yourself to connect with the innocence of your inner child, and assure your inner child of the safety of the present time, right? So we need to love ourselves, and we need to let go of that shame and that self-blame, the stuff that doesn't belong to us anyway, and wasn't our fault, And we need to be good to ourselves and kind to ourselves. Show ourselves some compassion, just like I would want somebody to show me that, and I would also need to show someone else that, but I also need to do that for myself, right? And so, I want people to treat me the way I treat them, and I try to be a good person, and I make mistakes, and I'm not perfect. And I mean, unlike some people who think they're perfect, I'm not perfect, and I admit that. And the thing is I want people to care about me as I care about them, but I also need to care about myself, and that's why I do a lot of this inner child healing work. It's very, very important. But whatever you do, make sure you get help. Reach out. If you're not coping well and you're struggling, call a crisis line. Do whatever you have to do, but you get help and you make sure you reach out and don't suffer on your own, right? So have a beautiful day, everybody. I hope you have a good day, and we will talk to you tomorrow.